You can't bring your wheelchair inside. It'll scratch the floors, my brother's wife said at Thanksgiving. I waited outside, in the cold. 2 months later, I bought the house. First thing I did was tear out the floors. The cold was the first thing that truly registered. Not the emotional chill of my sister-in-law's words, but the physical, biting November air that seeped through my coat. It found the gaps in my scarf and settled deep in my bones. A damp, unwelcome guest. Thanksgiving. A day for warmth, for gratitude, for family. But for me, it was a day spent on a flagstone patio, staring through a sliding glass door at the life I used to be a part of. Inside, there was laughter. I could see the steam rising from the gravy boat, the flicker of candlelight on the polished surfaces of Cynthia's perfect dining room, and I was out here, in my wheelchair because of those very floors. You can't bring your wheelchair inside, she had said, her voice a carefully constructed melody of feigned regret. It'll scratch the Brazilian cherry wood. Mark, my brother, her husband, had just stood there. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze flitting between my face and the gleaming expanse of wood that stretched out behind her. He looked like a man caught in a current, too weak to swim against it. He opened his mouth, a little puff of condensation escaping into the cold, but no words followed. Cynthia's hand was on his arm, a delicate but firm anchor, a warning. She was the captain of this ship, and he was just a deckhand sworn to obedience. She smiled at me, a brilliant, empty performance. I'm so sorry, Alex. We can bring a plate out to you. It's really not that cold, is it? We'll leave the door cracked. It was that cold. It was the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your fingers feel like brittle twigs, but the physical discomfort was a distant echo of the roaring furnace of humiliation and betrayal in my chest. This wasn't just about floors. It was never just about the floors. It was about me. It was about the accident that had put me in this chair 6 months prior. It was about the sprawling, inconvenient reality of my new life crashing into the meticulously curated aesthetic of hers. My wheelchair was not an accessory she could coordinate with her throw pillows. It was a declaration of imperfection, a screeching metal and rubber protest against her flawless world, and so it had to be banished. I remember the look on my Uncle Robert's face when he found me. He had come outside for a smoke, his usual Thanksgiving ritual. He stopped short, the unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. His eyes took in the scene. Me, huddled in my coat, my hands tucked into my armpits for warmth, the slightly ajar sliding door, a cruel sliver of light and sound, and the empty patio chair beside me where my plate of rapidly cooling turkey was supposed to go. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over, his heavy work boots making a crunching sound on the frosty stones, and sat down on the low brick wall opposite me. What in God's name are you doing out here, Alex? He finally asked, his voice a low rumble. I tried to smile, to make a joke of it, enjoying the crisp autumn air, getting a head start on my winter tan. My voice cracked on the last word. The flimsy dam I had built around my emotions began to crumble. He just looked at me, his expression hardening. He had seen me through my worst days after the crash. He was the one who helped retrofit my small apartment, who drove me to physical therapy when the transport van was late. He knew the fight I was in, the daily war waged just to get out of bed. He looked past me, through the glass, his eyes landing on Cynthia as she flitted around the table, refilling wine glasses, her laughter tinkling like cheap wind chimes. The floors, I said, the words tasting like ash. She said the wheels would scratch her precious floors. Uncle Robert slowly, deliberately put the cigarette back in its pack. He stood up, his large frame blocking the view of the party inside. No, he said, the word a flat, hard stone. This isn't happening. He turned and strode toward the door, his shoulders squared with a kind of righteous fury I hadn't seen in him since my aunt tried to serve him a tofurkey one year. He slid the door open with a force that made it rattle in its tracks. The warm air and noise from inside washed over me for a brief, tantalizing moment before he stepped through and shut it firmly behind him, leaving me once again in the cold and the quiet. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see the tableau. I saw Uncle Robert's arm shoot out, pointing at me on the patio. I saw Cynthia's face tighten, her perfect hostess smile dissolving into a mask of indignation. I saw Mark shrink, his hands going up in a placating gesture that did nothing. Other family members turned, their expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. The festive atmosphere inside that glass box had been shattered. My banishment, intended to be a quiet, clean excision, had become the main event. A part of me, the part that hated conflict, wanted to wheel myself down the ramp at the edge of the patio and just leave. But another part, a newly forged, colder, harder part, held me fast. I would not run. I would sit here and bear witness to the consequences of her cruelty. The confrontation inside lasted for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the sliding door flew open again. It was Mark. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered energy. Alex, come on, let's get you home. He wasn't looking at me, but at some point over my shoulder. He was avoiding the sight of me, the source of all this trouble. What about dinner? I asked, my voice flat. It's ruined, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone, as if remembering he was supposed to be the caring brother. I mean, everyone's upset. She's very upset. Uncle Robert really went off. He was already rewriting the narrative. The problem wasn't Cynthia's action. It was Uncle Robert's reaction. The problem was the disruption, not the cause of it. She's upset, I said, the words coming out in a low, dangerous whisper. She's upset? Mark, I am sitting in the freezing cold on Thanksgiving because your wife is worried about her hardwood, and you're telling me she's upset? You don't understand, Alex, he pleaded, his voice dropping. She's been planning this for months. The catering, the decorations, everything had to be perfect. She's under a lot of pressure. Pressure? I almost laughed. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. He was defending her. Even now, after this public, undeniable act of malice, he was still her protector. He was still choosing her side. That was the moment I understood. It wasn't just that he was weak, it was that he was complicit. His silence was an endorsement. His excuses were a second betrayal, a twisting of the knife she had already plunged into my back. Uncle Robert appeared behind him, my coat in one hand and my bag in the other. He gently draped the extra coat over my shoulders. "Let's go, kiddo," he said, his voice soft but firm. He shot a look at Mark, a look of such profound disappointment that my brother visibly flinched. "I'll drive you." Mark didn't protest. He just stepped aside, a ghost at his own feast, as my uncle carefully maneuvered my chair down the ramp he had built for them just 2 months before. As we moved toward his truck, I risked one last glance back at the house. Cynthia was standing in the doorway now, framed by the warm light. She wasn't crying. She wasn't remorseful. Her arms were crossed, and her face was set in a glare of pure, unadulterated fury. It was the look of a queen whose perfectly orchestrated coronation had been spoiled by a peasant. In her eyes, I wasn't her husband's disabled sister. I was the enemy. And in that cold, clear moment, the feeling became mutual. The drive home was silent. Uncle Robert just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The heater blasted, but it couldn't touch the chill that had settled in my marrow. When we got to my apartment, he helped me inside and started making tea without asking. He moved around my small, accessible kitchen with a familiar ease. "She's always been like that," he said, his back to me as he filled the kettle. "Just better at hiding it. All about appearances. Your brother, he got caught in the shiny wrapping and never bothered to look at what was inside. I just sat in my living room, the silence of my own space a heavy blanket. The smell of my uncle's tea was comforting, but it felt like a small bandage on a gaping wound. The betrayal wasn't just Cynthia's, it was Mark's. We had been through everything together. The scraped knees of childhood, the awkwardness of high school, the grief of losing our parents. I was there for him when he met Cynthia, when he was so giddy with love he could barely form a sentence. I was his best person at their wedding, and when I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to feel my legs, he was the one holding my hand, telling me we'd get through it. He had said we. But somewhere along the way, we had become him and her, and I had become an inconvenience, an obstacle, a potential scratch on the floor. That night, I didn't sleep. I just replayed the scene over and over. Cynthia's clinical smile, Mark's averted eyes, the biting cold, the pane of glass separating me from them. It was a perfect, cruel metaphor for my new reality. I was on the outside now, looking in. The next morning, the anger began to set in. It was a slow, rising tide, pushing out the grief and the shock. This wasn't just an insult. It was a deliberate act of dehumanization. She hadn't seen me, Alex, her sister-in-law. She had seen a piece of equipment, a threat to her property. She had weighed my comfort, my dignity, my inclusion in a family holiday against the pristine surface of her floorboards and found me wanting. I called my therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma. I had started seeing her after the accident to deal with the trauma and the depression. "She put you outside?" Dr. Sharma's voice was calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. "In the cold?" "She was worried about the floors," I said, the words sounding even more insane when spoken aloud to a neutral third party. "Alex," she said gently, "this has nothing to do with the floors. You know that, don't you? This is about control. Your disability is something she cannot control. It doesn't fit into the perfect picture she wants to project, so she is attempting to control you by marginalizing you, by literally putting you outside the frame." We talked for an hour. She had me walk through the feelings, the humiliation, the rage, the profound sadness of my brother's inaction. She didn't offer easy platitudes. She validated my anger. She told me it was a healthy, appropriate response to a deeply unhealthy situation. "What you do with that anger is what matters now," she said. "You can let it consume you, or you can let it fuel you." I didn't know what that meant at the time. Fuel me to do what? Scream at them? Cut them out of my life forever? The idea of severing ties with Mark was a physical pain, a phantom limb aching for a connection that was no longer there. A week passed. I heard nothing from Mark. No apology, no explanation, just a cavernous silence. Then, a text message finally arrived. Not from him, but from Cynthia. It was a photo of a small padded mat. The caption read, "Found these online. They're called caster coasters. But we can get a set for your chair for Christmas. That way you can come inside next time without any fuss." Problem solved. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it left me breathless. The smiley face, the breezy, problem-solving tone, as if the issue was a technical one that could be solved with a $10 piece of plastic. As if the problem wasn't her cruelty, but my wheels. She was trying to frame her abuse as a practical concern, and my reaction as an over-emotional outburst. She was gaslighting me via text message. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and sent it to Uncle Robert. His response was immediate and succinct. "That woman has the devil in her." That text message was a turning point. It clarified everything. There was no misunderstanding to clear up. There was no apology forthcoming because, in her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She was the victim of my inconvenient disability and my family's over-the-top reaction. Her offer of caster coasters wasn't an olive branch. It was a restatement of her terms. "You are welcome in my house only if you adapt yourself to my house's needs. Your needs, your dignity, are secondary." It was then that a new thought began to form. A cold, hard, and strangely comforting idea. Dr. Sharma had told me to use my anger as fuel, and Cynthia had just handed handed me a gallon of premium-grade gasoline. The thought was simple, insane, and utterly compelling. I wanted that house. I wanted the one thing she valued more than family, more than decency, more than her own husband's sister. I wanted to take her castle. I wanted to stand in the middle of her perfect dining room and decide for myself what was and was not important. I knew it was a crazy idea. I had no idea if they would ever sell. I had a settlement from the accident, but I didn't know if it would be enough. It was a fantasy, a coping mechanism, a way to channel my rage into a productive, if imaginary, goal. I started calling it the project in my head. It gave me a sense of purpose beyond the daily grind of physical therapy and navigating a world not built for me. I called Uncle Robert. Hypothetical question, I said. Do you know if Mark and Cynthia are doing okay financially? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Funny you should ask, he said. I was talking to your Aunt Carol. She mentioned that Cynthia was complaining about the cost of that Thanksgiving dinner. Said something about putting it on a credit card. Apparently that house is mortgaged to the hilt. Mark's salary is good, but her interior design consultant business is more of a hobby that spends money than makes it. They're house poor, Alex, drowning in debt to keep up appearances. The fantasy suddenly felt a little less fantastic. It felt possible. A long shot, but possible. The information was a key, turning a lock in my mind. Her greatest pride was also her greatest vulnerability. The Brazilian cherry wood floors weren't just a symbol of her status. They were a symbol of her financial overreach, of the precarious foundation upon which her perfect life was built. I started watching. I set up an online alert for real estate listings in their neighborhood. I drove by the house once a week, my own strange pilgrimage. It was still perfect from the outside. The lawn was manicured. The holiday wreaths were perfectly symmetrical. But now I saw it differently. I didn't see a fortress of perfection. I saw a gilded cage, a prison of debt and appearances. My relationship with Mark remained a frozen wasteland. He sent a perfunctory Merry Christmas text. I replied, "You too." The chasm between us felt too wide to bridge. Any attempt at conversation would require him to acknowledge what had happened, to admit his failure to defend me, and it was clear he was incapable of that. Choosing Cynthia meant choosing her version of reality, and in her reality, I was the problem. In mid-January, my weekly drive-by yielded a shock. It was subtle, a small, discreet sign from a high-end real estate agency, tucked into a corner of the perfectly landscaped garden. For sale. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was happening. They were selling. The pressure had become too much. The beautiful, perfect house was a weight they could no longer carry. I pulled my car over to the curb, my hands trembling slightly. I stared at the sign, at the elegant font, at the smiling face of the real estate agent. This was it. The project was no longer a fantasy. It was a real, tangible opportunity, sitting right in front of me. The first person I called was not a real estate agent. It was a lawyer. I needed a different kind of professional, someone who understood strategy and discretion. I found a firm that specialized in contract law and real estate, and I made an appointment with a partner named Sarah Jenkins. I rolled into her sleek downtown office feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I explained the situation, leaving out the most personal details at first. "There's a property I'm interested in purchasing," I said, trying to sound cool and professional, "but the circumstances are delicate. I need to purchase it without the sellers knowing who I am, at least not until the sale is final." Sarah Jenkins listened, her face impassive. She was in her late 40s with sharp eyes and an air of unflappable competence. She didn't ask why, she just nodded. "That's what an LLC is for," she said simply. "We can form a limited liability company for you. The company will be the buyer. Your name will be on the company's formation documents, but those are not typically shared with the seller in a standard transaction. We'll name it something innocuous, Midwest Property Holdings or something equally boring." "Okay," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "Okay, good." Then I told her the rest. I told her about Thanksgiving, about the floors, about my brother, about Cynthia. I told her why I was doing this. I expected her to judge me, to see it as a petty act of revenge. Instead, her expression softened with something that looked like understanding. "My sister is a disability advocate," she said. "I've heard stories. What you're doing, it's not petty. It's about reclamation. You're not just buying a house, Alex. You're taking back your power, and I will be happy to help you do it." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and her team moved with terrifying efficiency. We formed Oak Ridge Investments, LLC. We engaged a buyer's agent, a man named Ben, who was brought into the circle of trust and understood the need for absolute discretion. Ben got the details on the house. The asking price was high, banking on the custom finishes and the desirable neighborhood, but there was a note of urgency in the listing. They wanted a quick close. "They're in a hurry," Ben told me over the phone. "My sources say the husband's company just had a round of layoffs. He's fine, but the year-end bonuses were cut. Looks like they were counting on that money to stay afloat. They're leveraged to the breaking point. The pieces were all falling into place." It felt like destiny, a dark and complicated kind of karma. Their precarious financial situation, built on Cynthia's need for a flawless facade, was the very thing that would allow me to dismantle it. We made an offer. We came in under the asking price, a strong cash offer with a quick closing date presented on behalf of Oak Ridge Investments. The cash offer was a strategic move, using a significant portion of my accident settlement. It was a gamble, tying up my financial future in this one symbolic act, but it was also a show of strength. Cash offers are clean, fast, and less likely to fall through. For sellers in a hurry, they are incredibly tempting. The wait for their response was agonizing. I checked my phone every 5 minutes. I replayed every possible scenario in my head. What if they rejected it? What if they got a better offer? What if Cynthia, with her snobbery, was offended by a corporate-sounding buyer and held out for a nice family? Ben called 2 days later. They countered, he said. They came down a bit, but they're still high. More importantly, the agent mentioned something. The wife is apparently very emotionally attached to the house. She wants the buyers to write a letter. You know, one of those, we're a young family and we can picture our kids growing up here letters. She wants to sell to the right people. I felt a surge of cold fury. Of course she did. Even in defeat, she wanted to control the narrative. She wanted to handpick her successors to ensure her legacy of perfection was passed on to people she deemed worthy. She didn't want her palace to be sold to a faceless corporation. What do we do? I asked Sarah in a conference call. We refuse, Sarah said without hesitation. Politely. Ben will tell their agent that our client is a private investment firm and it is against their policy to disclose personal details about their principals. We will, however, raise our offer slightly. We dangle more money in front of them. Let's see what she values more, her sentimental narrative or a check that will solve her debt problem. It was a masterstroke. We were calling her bluff. We were forcing her to put a price tag on her principals. We raised the offer by another $20,000, still below asking, but a significant jump. We reiterated our desire for a fast, no contingency, all-cash closing. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I imagined the arguments in that house. I could practically hear Cynthia's shrill protests about soulless corporations and the sanctity of her home. And I could imagine Mark, the practical, terrified man, pointing at their mountain of debt and the clean, simple solution we were offering. I wondered who would win, the fantasist or the pragmatist. Ben called the next evening. His voice was calm, but I could hear the smile in it. They accepted, he said. Congratulations, Alex. The house is yours. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just let out a long, slow breath I felt like I had been holding since Thanksgiving. I closed my eyes and pictured the house. My house. I pictured the gleaming Brazilian cherry wood floors, and I smiled. The closing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. It was an exercise in sterile bureaucracy. Documents were prepared. Funds were transferred. My name was nowhere on the primary paperwork. It was all Oak Ridge Investments. Cynthia and Mark would be walking into that closing office with no idea they were about to sign their home over to me. Sarah and I debated whether I should attend the closing. You don't have to, she said. I can sign on behalf of the LLC. You can wait for the keys. No, I said immediately. I have to be there. I needed to see their faces. I needed to witness the final transfer of power, not as a hidden manipulator, but as a present, visible force. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It was the final act of a deeply personal drama. I deserved a front row seat. The day of the closing was gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of my mood. It wasn't triumphant joy I was feeling. It was a heavy, solemn sense of resolution. I dressed carefully in a sharp black blazer and dark pants. I wanted to look strong, professional, immovable. Uncle Robert drove me. He didn't say much, just gave my shoulder a squeeze before I wheeled myself into the generic office building. Sarah was waiting for me in the lobby. They're in the conference room, she said. Ready? I nodded, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. We entered the room together. It was a bland, wood-paneled space dominated by a long, polished table. At the far end sat Mark and Cynthia. They were talking quietly with their real estate agent. They looked up as we entered. Mark's eyes widened in stunned recognition. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Cynthia's expression went through a rapid, fascinating series of transformations. Confusion, then irritation at the interruption, then a slow, dawning, horrified comprehension as she looked from me to Sarah and then to the stack of documents in front of her. What is she doing here? Cynthia demanded, her voice sharp. She looked at her agent, then at the title officer at the head of the table. Sarah placed her briefcase on the table with a soft click. She smiled, a cool, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good morning. I'm Sarah Jenkins, counsel for Oak Ridge Investments. And this, she said, gesturing to me, is the principal of Oak Ridge Investments, my client. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Mark's face had gone completely white. He looked from me to Cynthia and back again, his mouth slightly agape. He looked utterly broken. Cynthia just stared. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of rage that crept up her neck. Her eyes, which I had last seen glaring at me from her doorway, were now filled with a toxic cocktail of shock, hatred, and disbelief. You, she whispered, the word a venomous dart. You did this? You're selling your house, I said, my voice even and calm. I was surprised at how steady I sounded. I'm buying it. It's a simple transaction. This is a joke, she spat, her voice rising. This is some kind of sick, twisted joke. You can't buy our house. Actually, the title officer interjected, a man clearly eager to get through this ordeal. The funds have been verified and all the paperwork is in order. All we need are your signatures. He gestured to the documents in front of them. Cynthia looked at Mark, her eyes blazing. Mark, do something. Don't just sit there. We are not selling our home to her. Mark finally found his voice, but it was weak and reedy. Cynthia, the papers are all drawn up. We have to sign. There's no other offer. We'll lose our down payment on the new place. He wasn't arguing on principle. He was arguing from a place of pure, desperate practicality. The financial trap they had set for themselves had snapped shut, and I was the one holding the chain. I will not, she shrieked, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. I will not be humiliated like this. Sarah spoke again, her voice cutting through Cynthia's hysterics. You are, of course, free to walk away from the sale, she said calmly. However, as you would be in breach of a legally binding purchase agreement, my client would be entitled to sue for specific performance and for damages. Given your financial situation, which I can assure you we are well aware of, I would strongly advise against that course of action. It would be ruinously expensive for you. Checkmate. Sarah had not just brought a pen to this signing, she had brought a sword. Cynthia stood there, trembling with a rage she had nowhere to direct. She was trapped. Her vanity, her pride, her house, it had all been leveraged against her. She looked at me, her face a mask of pure loathing. If looks could kill, I would have been incinerated on the spot. Slowly, as if moving underwater, she sat back down. She snatched the pen from the table. Her hand was shaking as she signed her name on the first document, the ink a dark, angry scrawl. She didn't look at it. She just signed, her eyes fixed on me. Mark followed suit, his signature a weak, shaky contrast to hers. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at the polished surface of the table, at the reflection of a man who had lost everything and knew it was his own fault. They signed page after page. The only sound in the room was the scratch of the pen and Cynthia's ragged breathing. When it was over, the title officer gathered the documents. "Congratulations," he said, his voice strained with forced cheerfulness. He pushed a small velvet bag across the table toward Sarah. The keys. Sarah slid the bag over to me. I took it. The keys made a soft, heavy clinking sound in my palm. Cynthia stood up. She didn't say a word. She just gave me one last look of utter hatred, then turned and walked out of the room. Mark hesitated for a moment. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. He wanted something from me. Forgiveness? Absolution? An acknowledgement that we were still family? I gave him nothing. I just met his gaze with a cool, level stare. I held up the bag of keys. He flinched, then turned and followed his wife. A defeated man walking toward a future he had not chosen but had certainly earned. I let out a slow breath. It was done. Uncle Robert was waiting by his truck. He saw the look on my face, the keys in my hand. He just nodded. "Let's go," he said. "Let's go home." We didn't drive to my apartment. We drove to the house. My house. Pulling into the driveway felt surreal. The perfectly manicured lawn, the stately brick facade. It was exactly as I remembered, but the power dynamic had been inverted. I was no longer the outcast on the patio. I was the owner. Uncle Robert helped me up the ramp, the same ramp he had built for them, and I wheeled myself to the front door. My hand was steady as I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open onto the foyer, and there they were. The Brazilian cherrywood floors. They gleamed under the recessed lighting. A sea of rich, reddish brown. They were beautiful, flawless, and they were the first thing that had to go. I spent the first hour just moving through the empty house. The previous owners had taken their furniture, but their presence lingered like a stale perfume. I could feel Cynthia in the ostentatious light fixtures, in the ridiculously oversized master bathroom, in the sheer, impractical whiteness of the kitchen. It was a monument to her ego. I stopped in the dining room, right by the sliding glass door that led to the patio. I looked out at the cold flagstones where I had sat just 2 months earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. I had been a victim then, powerless and freezing. Now I was in command. The next morning, I made a phone call, not to a moving company, but to a demolition crew. A man named Gus came out that afternoon. He was built like a refrigerator and had hands like catcher's mitts. "So, what are we taking out?" he asked, looking around the pristine dining room. "The floors," I said. "All of them, on the entire first level." He looked at me, then down at the gleaming hardwood. He ran a hand over his bald head. "Ma'am, are you sure? This is Brazilian cherrywood. This stuff costs a fortune. It's in perfect condition." "I'm sure," I said. "I want it gone. I want it taken down to the subfloor. Every last plank." He shrugged. "Your house? Your money? When do you want us to start?" "Tomorrow," I said. The day the demolition started was bright and sunny. I sat in my chair in the empty living room, a mug of coffee balanced on my lap. Gus and his crew arrived, armed with crowbars, mallets, and power saws. "You want to watch this?" Gus asked, a little surprised. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied. The first crowbar went in near the wall. There was a screech of protesting metal, a groan of wood, and then a loud, splintering crack as the first plank was pried from the floor. The sound was glorious. It was the sound of liberation. It was the sound of a new beginning. They worked their way across the room. The air filled with the smell of sawdust and the fine red dust of the pulverized wood. Planks were ripped up, tossed into a pile. The flawless, gleaming surface was systematically destroyed, revealing the plain, honest plywood subfloor beneath. It was an act of creative destruction. I wasn't just tearing out a floor. I was tearing out the foundation of a false idol. I was erasing the symbol of my own humiliation. Each crack of splintering wood felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. The screech of the nails being pulled was a song of vengeance. It was loud, it was messy, it was violent, and it was the most therapeutic thing I had ever experienced. By the end of the day, the entire first floor was gone. The Brazilian cherrywood, Cynthia's pride and joy, lay in a splintered, pathetic heap on the front lawn, waiting to be hauled away like the trash it had become. I wheeled myself across the rough plywood, the ride bumpy and uneven, and it felt wonderful. The house was finally truly mine. It was no longer her sanctuary. It was my canvas. The weeks that followed were a blur of renovation. I hired a contractor who specialized in universal design. We widened doorways. We installed a roll-in shower. We lowered countertops. We made the house not just accessible, but welcoming. And for the floors, I chose something simple, durable, and beautiful. Wide plank white oak. It was warm. It was honest. And it was strong enough to handle anything. Wheelchair wheels. Dog claws. dancing feet, whatever life decided to throw at it. Its value was in its utility, not its untouchable perfection. I saw Mark only one more time. He showed up at the house unannounced about a month into the renovations. He stood in the doorway, looking at the chaos of construction, the raw drywall, the stacks of new flooring. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I'm making it my home," I said simply. "Cynthia is a wreck, Alex," he said, as if this was supposed to move me. "We're living in a tiny apartment. She cries all the time. She says you destroyed her life." I looked at him, standing there in the middle of my new, open-plan living room. He still didn't get it, or he refused to. "She's the one who put a price on family, Mark, and I just happened to be able to afford it. You made your choice on Thanksgiving Day. You chose a piece of wood over your own sister. This," I said, gesturing to the house around us, "is just the consequence of that choice." He had nothing to say to that. He just stood there for a long moment, a stranger in what used to be his home, a brother in name only. Then he turned and left. I haven't seen or heard from him since. The severing was final. It was a grief I had to process, the loss of the brother I once had, but it was also a relief. The weight of his weakness was no longer mine to carry. Life is different now. It's quieter. My family is smaller, tighter. It consists of Uncle Robert, who has his own key and comes over for dinner every Sunday. It consists of a few loyal friends who saw me through the darkness. It consists of Dr. Sharma, who helped me understand that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what was taken from you. I don't think about Cynthia much anymore. I hear whispers through the family grapevine that she and Mark are struggling, that she can't seem to hold down a job, that she talks endlessly about the beautiful house they used to have. She has become a ghost, haunting a past I have since demolished and rebuilt. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I'll sit by the new, wider sliding glass doors in my dining room. They open onto the same patio, but the patio is different now. It has a built-in fire pit and comfortable chairs. It's a place for gathering, for warmth, for inclusion. I'll look at my beautiful, durable white oak floors and run my hand over their smooth, strong surface. They have a few scratches already, a scuff from a dropped tool, a mark from my own wheels, and I don't mind at all. They're signs of life. They're proof that this is a home, not a museum. And in this home, everyone is welcome, and no one, ever again, will be left out in the cold. The scars on the floor are a reminder that perfection is a lie, but resilience is real. And it's far more beautiful than any polished surface could ever be.